welcome to the second and final day of the Banking Technology Forum CX Summit. We have an amazing lineup of speakers to learn from today, along with equally notable attendees to network with. If you didn't say hi to that special person yesterday, the time is now. To kick us off today, I'm excited to introduce Kareem Kombarji. Kareem offers years of extraordinary success in a series of high-level roles at top-tier companies like Citi. His invaluable expertise and broad business range have powered a history of successful process improvement projects that drive productivity, reliability, and client satisfaction. He leverages expertise in innovation, digitization, and creative problem solving to continually deliver solutions to complex issues. Kareem holds a master's degree from Columbia University and a Bachelor of Science in Engineering from Lehigh University. Please join me in welcoming Kareem to the stage.
Thank you so much, Patrika. Happy to be here. And thanks everyone for having me today. So as Patrika mentioned, we're going to be talking today about how we do some things at Citi, right? Particularly, one of the big use cases I always hear is how we're able to drive change at such a large and complex organization like Citi. And so today, I'm really going to try to walk you through some things that I've learned through my experiences over the time. Really focusing on three main elements of success in driving this sort of change. And if I can leave you with those three takeaways, it's really make sure that you get beyond the anecdotes when you're trying to solve a problem, that you really start talking about facts and you shift the discussion away from, he said, she said, to real hard data and facts. It was become really hard to argue with. It makes it so that you can present a really compelling and powerful case. The second takeaway I want to make sure I leave you with is don't be afraid about being bold, right? Be relentless, right? A lot of this change is not easy, especially at when you're dealing with a little bit more complex organizational structures. And so it's going to take persistence, and you're going to have to learn how to persevere through it. And so, I'd urge you to not be discouraged by any, something is taking a little bit too long or longer than you would have liked, because that's part of the fun that gets this in driving change at big organizations. And then the third takeaway I want to leave you with is make sure that you don't end your change just with actually clicking, deploying the final modules. Make sure you actually start to tell a story around what did you do, what impact has that change had on the organization, on your clients, and on your bottom line, right? And so make sure you report on that progress and you tell that story. So throughout the course of this presentation, I'm going to walk you into a little bit more detail on each of these three elements and how I go about directing change at Citi and within the commercial bank specifically. And so I mentioned we want to get to the facts. And so really the first thing I like to do is to start to establish a clear baseline, right? I try to, anytime I'm working on a new problem, I start to try to gather who the key stakeholders are who are impacted by that problem, whether it's internal stakeholders, external stakeholders, or a combination of the two. And I sit down with them and I really try to listen and understand, what does the current state process look like? Right? Get away from any, personal qualms about the problem. Try to get away from any opinions about how things work, and try to understand the facts. How does the process work step by step? And try to document that, and whether that's a process flow or whether that's kind of, detailed, organized notes, whatever works. I typically, prefer process flow, but I'm a process guy, so I'm a little bit biased here. Alongside that, try to define some of the key performance metrics, right? Try to understand what those metrics are, and then dimension how we're performing against those metrics today, right? So, if cycle time, right, turnaround time, the amount of time it takes to get through the process end to end is a key performance metric. Great, let's measure how we're performing against that metric today. What does the cycle time look like? And let's slice and dice that by the different kind of client groups, the different geographies, the different industries, whatever makes sense to really be able to understand that story and tell that story in the right way. Let's also start to conduct some interviews, right? And like I was saying, leverage that process mapping, understand the metrics clearly, and use that to kind of create a catalog of, that you can then put together objectively as an objective third party that details out all the pain points as you see it. And then from there, you're able to really roll up your sleeves and get into the weeds, right? You're able to then try to dissect the different vantage points that are involved, right? Understanding how this works from the client perspective, but also how does the problem impact the sales team and our underlying technology organizations and perhaps, your risk and compliance teams and whoever else might be involved, right? Really try to understand the problem from all the different facets that are involved, because what you really have to get an appreciation for is that the problem is quite rarely one-sided, right? There are multiple vantage points involved here, and so it's critical, absolutely critical, that you understand everyone's individual perspective so that you can make sure you take that in mind. And one of the ways I tend to try to do that sometimes is to schedule what I like to call a DILO, a day in the life of. And really what that is just sitting side by side with someone. And I know now during COVID, that's a little bit more challenging, but hopefully once we're all back in the office soon, this will become more feasible. But it's really about sitting side by side with someone who's kind of elbow deep in the process and watching what they do, getting an understanding of how the process works and seeing the reality of what works, what doesn't work, and starting to develop your own appreciation for some of those pain points that you cataloged just a moment ago. And then, try to then identify who those key subject matter experts are so that you can sit down with them and use them as a sounding board to ask some of the critical questions you might have and help you form your own perspective. And I can't stress that enough, right? Make sure you form your own perspective. Don't just go off of what someone might be saying, because you might get swayed by something that one person thinks and another person doesn't. And so it is absolutely critical that you get into the weeds, you see how the process works, you understand the vantage points, and that you use all of that to build your own perspective. And the last part about really getting to the facts is making sure that you summarize your findings. There are so many times I see things go wrong when somebody misunderstands a process and draws conclusions and actions and recommendations from a process that was simply an incorrect set of assumptions. And so once you think you've developed your own perspective and you've developed that baseline understanding of the metrics and of the process, I can't stress enough that it's critical that you sit down with your key stakeholders and partners. Those partners who are often the same partners who helped you develop that process and understanding in the first place. But sit down with them again and walk them through what you've learned. Walk them through the process flow. Walk them through the metrics. Walk them through anything else that you may have put together as part of your analysis, and use that to try to make sure that you're all working from the same baseline and you've all come to the same set of facts. And once you've had that discussion and you've been able to do that, it becomes you all of a sudden have a very compelling tool in your arsenal, where at that point in time you're now no longer talking about anecdotes, you're talking about facts, and you can always refer back to that discussion, to those artifacts and to those documents that you put together, and make sure that all of your conversations from then on out are referring back to that baseline set of facts. And as a result, keeps you grounded in reality and doesn't get you going back into the anecdotal, finger pointing that you often see in these sorts of discussions. From then on out, the other, I'll just cover a few other things about what's important here from a factual perspective and in terms of gathering your facts. And in my mind, quantifying the process is paramount. Understanding the pain points and socializing those are critical. But I think the only other thing I would say here is, or really two other things I would say here is, in these discussions, right, it's important to also understand the impact of each of your observations, the impact of each of these pain points, right? Is this impacting, and when I say impact, I don't just mean, what is the pain point, because that's, we've already communicated that, but it's really trying to understand who is being impacted by that pain point and what results from that pain point, right? Is there a financial impact? Is there an experience impact? Is there kind of a reputational impact, right? Whatever it is, right? It's important to really dimension that and quantify that, and kind of see if you can even tie that back to some of the key performance metrics that we talked about a few moments ago. Then that really again helps you start to differentiate. If you have a catalog of 10, 20, 30 pain points, and you're able to assign kind of an impact level to each of them, it helps you later down the road in terms of figuring out, where do you start? What's your priority? What are some of the biggest challenges that you should try to address first, second, third, fourth, etc. And the last thing I'll say is just some advice on this. And it's actually quite hard to do, but try to avoid jumping to solutioning. When in my experience, at least, when you sit down with a group of stakeholders and you try to get them to talk about the process, and especially get them to talk about some of the pain points that exist, more often than not, people have their own, ideas about how to solve those problems, and will have a tendency to jump towards describing what those solutions might look like. And in doing so, I think, in my own opinion, I believe that pushes you away from getting grounded in the facts. It might be helpful, and you might want to kind of put that in a parking lot to get back to at a later stage. But I think it's absolutely critical to make sure that you stick to understanding what the problem is, what the facts and the pain points are associated with that problem, and the impact associated to that as well at this stage, right? That way you're all starting and you're kind of singing from the same hymn sheet going forward. So that's kind of, I think, the first pillar of success in terms of driving change in your organization, is getting to the facts. And like we said, it's really about establishing a clear baseline, getting into the weeds to understand the real details behind that process, and then socializing your findings, talking to your stakeholders, and making sure you're all on the same page and you're starting from the consistent starting point. With that takes us to the second element of success here, which is really about being bold and being relentless. And the way I think of this, right, is don't be afraid to really envision the art of the possible, right? And that can, you can approach this in a few different ways. The way that I tend to like to do this is to workshop with the stakeholders, right? That, and it's often that same group of stakeholders we were just talking about. But now that you have kind of a trusted cohort of advisors, sit down with them, and now is the time to listen to to how they might like to solve these problems, and try to elevate that discussion. Try to get away from a lot of the misconceptions or the potential barriers or roadblocks that people have in their minds in terms of why a certain solution might be challenging to implement. Instead, try to focus, try to take those away and try to focus on, in an ideal world, what might the solution look like, and use that to try to get your imaginations going in terms of how you can really think differently and creatively about driving change and implementing a solution here. As part of that, and part of understanding and kind of expanding your horizons here, is really to kind of investigate and see, what are other people doing, right? It's quite often that a lot of these problems people are solving are not unique, and other people either have the same problem or have solved it already in one way or another. And so, I'd encourage you to, if you're at a large organization and there are other lines of businesses that you can go talk to and engage with, go talk to them. Ask, explain your problem. See if they have a similar problem, and if they had a similar challenge, how have they addressed it? Right? See if you can use any of those ideas and any of those solutions. If not, go, try to see what your competition has done, right? Start tapping into your network, seeing what people have done at other organizations and how they've developed solutions. And use all that. I'm not suggesting by any means that you kind of copy what your competition has done, but use that to kind of inspire yourself and think through what you should be doing, what you shouldn't be doing, and how you can put this together in terms of getting to that last portion here in terms of the art of the possible, which is really crafting a future state process, right? Now that you kind of know what the problems are and you've allowed yourself to dream and kind of almost think about what an ideal state can look like, this is the time when you can kind of get a clean sheet of paper and draw out what you believe this new process should be, right? And I, it's really important, I think, that you do that, and again, that you have that kind of roadmap of where you'd like to go, because that kind of will ground you in reality going forward and keep you focused on the end goal. And then from there, right, because typically, when you're talking about these sorts of large, complex implementations, they're roadmaps, they're journeys, they will take time to get together. And so with that, right, it's important that you prioritize the solutions that you've dimensioned. And so the same way that we dimension the impact of the pain points, I think it's important that you also dimension the impact of each of these enhancements that you would have thought about, or each of these aspects of the new process. And try to also layer in the feasibility, right? How easy is this to actually implement? How challenging is it to implement? And start to come up with a trade-off, right? Once you know the effort required to deploy a solution, once you know the potential impact you think this is going to have, you'll then be able to prioritize, right? Well, you'll be able to look at the impact of the pain point, look at the impact of the solution, and compare that against how much time and effort and money is required to deploy that solution. And you can start to prioritize what's going to come first, second, and third. And you might even go back and to that first step of the process and tweak your recommendation slightly as a result. And then from there, right, I think there are a few other things I would just recommend that are almost kind of, they're kind of sequential, but also a little bit in parallel, which is, don't be afraid to challenge the status quo, right? More often than not, there are people who have a tendency in nobody likes change. Let me put it that way, right? And so there are often, when you're trying to implement something bold and something visionary, more often than not, you're going to be faced with naysayers, right? People who might not necessarily see eye to eye, or people who might have concerns. They might not, want to do, what might seem a little bit more challenging in the short run, even though it might have better benefit in the long run. And so try to really switch the conversation from what can be done to what can be done, versus what can be done easily, or what can be done, easiest. And, I'm not saying to necessarily, don't get me wrong, I'm not telling you to go the easy route, right? By any means. In fact, I'm suggesting the opposite sometimes, right? Not always. I'm simply suggesting do what you think is right, right? Even if it is a bit more challenging in the short term, push for it. Don't worry about the impact that might have, or the challenge that might be ahead. Think about the impact it'll have at the end of the road. And as part of executing, right, I think it's key that you kind of project manage, right? And I think everyone here can probably relate to that and attest to that, is that you need to make sure that you establish a cadence of follow-ups, right? You have your stakeholders, you have your working teams, you have your sponsors, you have your partners. Meet with them. Be transparent in terms of what the expectations are. What deliverables do you want to get? What do you want to put out? What timeline do you have to get those done by? And check in, right? Set up a steering committee if you have to. Set up weekly check-ins, daily scrum calls. Do whatever works for you, right? I'm not going to dictate, how to organize your process, right? You guys obviously know best, but make sure that you follow up, check in, and ask about past due or forgotten items, and make sure that you stay on track. And this part of the process is critical, right? In terms of being bold and being relentless, because it really is what will end up driving the most impact. And then lastly, it's really about measuring success. And this one I think is a little bit more straightforward, so I'll be brief, right? But you cannot change what you can't measure. So make sure that you define early on how you're going to measure success, align on those success metrics with your stakeholders upfront, embed those metrics into your scorecards, into your process so that you can measure them as you go along, and then start creating a reporting cadence. Look at those metrics as the process is deployed and as the changes are deployed so that you can transparently celebrate success. And that, by the way, you can also call out failures. And I hate to be cliche, but fail fast, right? And pivot and change your strategy accordingly. And this is absolutely critical in telling your success and telling the story of your success and getting people and rallying the troops and getting people to follow behind you and embrace the change, right? It's really about the storytelling and the change management. And really, right, I said there were 3 pillars to success, but really, you know, uh, great things in business are never done by one person. They're done by a team of people. And so really there's almost like a fourth element here, which is really about people, right? Try to find the gems on the inside who can really serve as your change agents and use those people and those partnerships and that network of individuals that you can rally behind you to drive change through those people. There's nothing more compelling than having trusted experts rallying for this change on your behalf. So really, like I said, it's about getting to the facts. It's about being bold and being relentless. It's about measuring and communicating success, and it's about people. If you have those 4 things in your back pocket, if you have those 4 things top of mind as you move forward, I guarantee you will be successful in implementing large scale change at large scale organizations. That's the end of the presentation. Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure being here with you. I'll turn it back.
Thank you, Kareem.